The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily represent those of any organization, including One Generation Away.
America is free. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of enterprise, and freedom is special and rare.
This is Liberty Nation with Mark Angelides, a production of LibertyNation.com, going after what the politicians really mean and making it all clear. For your freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Mark Angelides.
President Joe Biden gets busy on the world stage, but did anyone really notice? It seems that perhaps this foreign jaunt was more to bolster his image back home than to engage in substantive deliberation with other world leaders. After all, the last round of sanctions and decisions were all conducted via a Zoom call. So what gave Joe those wandering feet? Could it be anything to do with rampant crime and sky-high gas prices on the home front? Stay tuned to find out. Welcome to Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. On today's show, we are going to ask the tough questions like whether President Joe Biden is capable of meeting the moment on the international stage with longtime host of this here radio show, Tim Donner. How New York City's Mayr Adams is channeling his inner Rudy Giuliani with Sarah Cowgill. And what's behind the global move at de-dollarization with economics guru Andrew Moran. And of course, we can't escape talking about the Supreme Court nomination hearings for Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. I want to take a moment to say a special thank you to our listeners out in Great Falls, Montana on KQDI 1450 AM, 97.5 FM. Thank you for being here. And remember, this show, it's proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. Thank you for being here, and let's get straight to it. The president is doing the rounds on his grand tour of Europe, cozying up to NATO, the G7, and the European Union. But what does it all mean for Americans? And is Joe Biden the right man for this job? Here to help us figure out the answer to those questions, we're joined by long-term host of this here Liberty Nation radio show, Mr. Tim Donner. Welcome back to the show, Tim.
Always a pleasure, Mark.
So, Tim, these meetings with the supranational organizations, are they helping or hindering the peace in Europe?
Well, you know, Mark, I think that there's strength in numbers, and there's 30 members of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization known as NATO, as opposed to one, Russia. And that doesn't even, of course, include Ukraine, which is not in NATO. So the 30-1 never hurts to remind Vladimir Putin that there's a whole lot of countries behind the opposition to him. Now, does this mean that the collective action would be more effective than individualized action? No, it does not mean that, because you know what they say about a camel being a horse drawn up by a committee.
By committee, yeah.
Yeah, so, you know, there's an upside and a downside, but I think that if it helps to remind Vladimir Putin that the entire world is aligned against him, that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, the benefits that NATO has in this situation, they don't really cross over to all the other organizations getting involved. For example, the European Union. So slightly off tangent, but the European Union wants to reduce its dependency on the Russian oil, but that requires all 27 member states to say yes. And if one says no, then it's out the window anyway.
And there's the whole conundrum about a supranational organization like that, is that you can't, it's very hard to take decisive action, to take bold action, and to take swift action. And I think we see all the rumblings that are occurring in NATO. You know, it took the initiative of, you know, Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, on the diplomatic front. I think this new German Chancellor Scholz is looking promising in terms of taking a tough line against Putin, the successor to Angela Merkel. But, you know, you're getting disparate voices. And so Joe Biden just wants to add his voice to the mix.
Well, that brings me nicely onto my next question, Tim. So it seems that Joe Biden, he's determined to be a major player in this Ukraine situation. Now, he went off to Europe and had his meetings, but the things that were being decided at these meetings, couldn't they have just been done on a Zoom call? So how much of this is really more about rebuilding Joe Biden's failed image as a statesman and a foreign policy leader?
Oh, that's probably 90% of it.
The rest of it,
right.
he just wants a tan.
All right, maybe only 75%. But look, there's no question, Mark, that this presidency, from a foreign policy standpoint on the international stage, was arguably irreparably damaged with the disastrous surrender in Afghanistan. So it's natural for any president to try and rebuild his foreign policy bona fides. So yes, he's absolutely believing that. I think it was George H.W. Bush was the latest president to quote the old expression, 90% of life is just showing up. I think for Joe Biden, 90% of this is just showing up to show the flag, to show that he's on board with the other members of NATO. Look, everybody knows Joe Biden is not a leader, but then again, who really is in this European conglomeration of nations aligned against Russia? So there is a vacuum, and maybe Biden thinks to some extent he can fill it and at least stand there, show the flag, and say a few of the right things.
Okay, now there was a recent Fox poll that came out, and it had two elements that really stood out to me. The first was that only 42% of Americans approve of Biden's handling of the Ukraine situation. Now, before we discuss the second point, that number, 42%, that's basically his approval rating right now, isn't it? And doesn't this signify that those who like him, and those that don't, just don't?
Well, I think what's happened here, Mark, is that we've sort of crossed something of what I would call a polling Rubicon, where the judgment of the Biden presidency is more a composite view of the man and his ability to be a leader than it is on any individual issue. In other words, a composite of everything that's happened really since last August and the invasion of Ukraine has been a negative for him. And it's all piling up, and there's a general sense of weakness. You're seeing 57% of people, for example, in a recent poll, said that Joe Biden was too old to be president. Well, where were those same people at the polls in 2020? There weren't 57.
Technically, he was 2 years younger than Tim. Let's be fair.
Well, okay, sure. Well, he crossed the Rubicon magically at 79 years old. But I think that the judgment now is on Biden and his capacity to do the job than it is on any individual issue like Ukraine or even inflation or even the border or even the urban crime wave. I think it's the composite sense that the man is not in control, is not a leader, and that his presidency is a weak one.
Okay, so I want to get to the second point that I mentioned about that poll, and that was that 73% of Americans are concerned that this could escalate into a nuclear war between Russia and the United States. What do you make of that?
Well, at the same time, Mark, I would point out that by a count of about 2-1, Americans want us to do more for Ukraine in defending it against the invasion from Russia. So I think that people are conflicted. People are seeing the horrifying images, the war crimes, and yes, that's exactly what they are, that are being committed by Vladimir Putin. And the natural instinct is to say, we're freedom-loving people. Can't we do something to stop this? And that's a 2-1 sentiment. But at the same time, you know, there is no appetite for going to war. And thinking down one layer deep, people say, what does Ukraine really have to do with us? How far are we willing to go to defend it? And once you raise the N-word, in this case, nuclear, yeah, people start getting very, very antsy at a level that they don't even get to when there's discussion of chemical weapons, which has also been on the table. So, you know, of course, there is concern that it could fall into nuclear war. The fact that it's 75% is somewhat stunning. But I think people, once they hear that word, they react viscerally and immediately believe, because that word is uttered, that it becomes a real possibility. And I think we have to separate out the political use of the word nuclear by Putin from the realistic chances that he would actually use it.
Well, as we heard from the mainstream media, every day Trump was in office was a nuclear threat. Tim Donner, thank you ever so much.
Always a pleasure, Mark.
Coming up later in the show, we examine the senatorial showdown over Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. But up next, is New York City's Mayr Adams channeling his inner Rudy Giuliani? Let's find out.
For your freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Mark Angelides.
Initially, there were hopes that former police officer, now Mayr Adams, would bring a much-needed law enforcement focus to New York City. But now that seems like a cruelly mocking nightmare for residents. But there on the horizon, something a little unusual. Yes, it seems that Mayr Adams is ready to channel his inner Rudy Giuliani when it comes to making a safer city. Well, national columnist Sarah Cowgill has been following events closely, and she has all the facts for us. Welcome to the show, Sarah.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
So I hear that Mayr Adams is going full Rudy Giuliani here and bringing back the broken window policies. Can you give us some details?
Okay, well, I'm not sure it's full Rudy Giuliani.
Let's say he's gone semi-Rudy.
Yeah, he might be. He's attempting to channel Rudy. I'm not sure.
He's a 10% Rudy.
he's a super duper light beer Rudy right now.
Okay.
But at least it's in the right direction.
He's vegan Rudy.
He's vegan Rudy.
Or
I'm going to use that. Thank you. I'm going to take that, steal that.
Details, please. Details.
Details. He's done this anti-gun squad, and in the amount of time it took him to start touting that, reporters were asking him about some other things that he was doing, like, are turnstile jumpers really the worst criminals ever? He, of course, said it's a crime. It doesn't matter, if it's a turnstile jumper or public urination or whatever, it's a crime. And so he has decided to kind of go back after that. And that is shades of Giuliani in the years of the 90s when he and his police commissioner cleaned up the streets pretty well.
Yeah, it was really quite a turnaround for the city. And I think what a lot of people missed with that is the purpose of arresting and prosecuting low-level crimes is that if criminals would think that, well, if I'm going to get arrested for this and I'm facing a punishment of, let's say, X amount of days or weeks for doing something that is relatively minor in the criminal scheme of things, that they would extrapolate that into, if I commit a larger crime, I'm going to get more of the same. And it did work as a fantastic deterrent. Now,
yes,
we know that these policies were wildly successful at the time, but the concept as a whole, it's kind of been derided by the political left over the years and criticized for making criminals out of, well, criminals, to be fair. So why is it making the comeback now? And could it be that what with the rampant crime increases, and really there's no other way to deal with criminals other than treating them as such, apparently. Could it be that the opposing narrative just failed?
Any kind of liberal soft on crime, big cities are going to have to, crack down on the smaller crimes, because as you're right, I mean, there are some stupid criminals, but criminals really now know, if I commit this crime, I'm looking at a fine, or I may have to show up in court. So, or if I jump a turnstile, then I'm fine. So I can go into the subway, jump the turnstile, don't have to worry about that. They'll dismiss that. I can pickpocket, I can rob, I can beat people up, whatever it is they're intending to do. And if they're not caught, that's gonna allow the crime to happen. B, it's going to just give them a reason to keep doing it. And I think he's finally figured out, if we can't defund the police, we got to actually use the police.
Yeah, I'm wondering if he's going to face any pushback from his own party in this, especially Albany and the prosecutors within his city who seem to want to not prosecute any crime whatsoever. So, for example, at the subway, there was just in recent days, there was somebody who attacked another individual with a hammer after pushing them down the stairs, and another who rubbed fecal matter on an innocent female bystander. And these gents, after arrest, were straight back out on the street with no charges filed.
No, they were released. If the citizens of New York want to put up with something like that, but I don't think they will. I think they're clamoring for. I mean, the guy ran on Law and Order. He's a former cop. So, they're clamoring for him to live up to what he promised that he would do. He's going to get pushback from Albany. He's going to get pushback from, the limousine liberals that shed crocodile tears. He's going to get all of that. But, he might also grow a pair and really make a stand. And if he makes a stand, that's going to be the first in a very long time to give New Yorkers some peace of mind.
I would very much like New Yorkers to feel safe in their city, but something tells me that that's probably not going to happen. And evidence piece A, Your Honor, is that Mayr Adams, he recently decided to hook up with some of the brightest minds in criminal justice reform and how to reduce crime, and that was Mayor Lori Lightfoot of Chicago.
Yeah, she knows how to paint sidewalks rainbow colors, but she's out of her depth when it comes to actual policing that works.
So this is the blind leading the blind, surely. Doesn't this show that Mayr Adams isn't serious about preventing crime?
I don't know if it was more of a PR stunt to, hey, all of us in the big cities are trying to come up with these great initiatives and work things out, and and appeal to the criminals, better angels to stop doing what they're doing. I don't know if that was his intent, or if he was, just trying to go, look, why don't we go a little hardcore and let's all do this at the same time? This city, that city, let's take Houston, LA, New York, Chicago, Phoenix, the bigger cities, and try to coordinate it.
That's an interesting idea, Sarah. So just for my final question here, I kind of want to jump into that idea that these cities, predominantly these Democrat-led cities, they're trying to show, at least as a public facade or a public persona, that they're doing something about crime. Now, is that because we're fast approaching the 2022 November congressional elections and gubernatorial elections, of course, and they're terrified that Republicans will run ads literally just showing crime stats for their cities? Your thoughts?
Yeah, that's all it's going to take. A typical black screen, white lettering, scare the bejesus out of people, and they're gonna vote against whoever is in office. And you're right, there doesn't need to be any kind of catchy phrases or any kind of campaign slogan. They just need to show the facts, and I think that will scare a lot of people into voting against the current regime that's in place.
Fire the cinematographer and the sound guy, and all they really need is a PowerPoint. Sarah Cowgill, thank you ever so much for being here. Much appreciated.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
You're listening to Liberty Nation Radio, heard across the Radio America network from our flagship station in the nation's capital, WWRC in Washington, D.C. You can tune in for Liberty Nation from 2 to 3 p.m. Sunday on KBKW 103.5 FM, 1450 AM, the talk of Grays Harbor. Now, down the road, we talk liberty with Scott Cosenza on the latest Supreme Court nomination. But up next, the global attack on the US dollar. Don't touch that dial.
America is free. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of enterprise, and freedom is special and rare.
This is Liberty Nation with Mark Angelides, a production of LibertyNation.com, going after what the politicians really mean and making it all clear. For your freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Mark Angelides.
Foreign nations are determined to ditch the dollar, and it's only going to get more painful from here on out. What's behind the move, and why don't the global elites want Mr. Benjamin, Mr. Washington, and others to grace their portfolios? Well, we have the answer, and to explain this in words that hopefully even I can understand, we're joined by economics guru and author, Mr. Andrew Moran. Welcome back to the show, Andrew.
Thank you for having me.
So let's set out the basic facts first, Andrew. What's happening to the dollar around the world?
Yeah, I read this report from this market analyst, and he said this is the birth of Bretton Woods 3. Now, I wouldn't go that far, but I think perhaps we are in the beginning stages of a huge de-dollarization push. So I think one of the biggest stories happening in the business world over the last couple of weeks has been underreported and should be gracing headlines everywhere, is that Saudi Arabia and China, they're considering a deal to sell for Riyadh to sell its oil contracts to China in yuan. Now, for a long time, all these oil deals, they were settled in dollars. Dollars account for 80% of all global oil transactions. So this is a huge dramatic shift. Saudi Arabia wants to settle oil futures in yuan. So this is a dramatic push for Saudi Arabia and also highlights the country's shift to focusing on Asia. India is also engaging in the same thing. This is also a remarkable shift. India is considering having a direct link, central bank link from India to Russia, and settling its exchanges in rupees and rubles as opposed to dollars. So India would buy
Let me
oil.
just jump in here, Andrew.
Yes.
So what does this actually mean, though? So that if dollars are not being used for international financial transactions between two third-party nations, how does that impact the U.S. anyway? So does the U.S. get extra kudos for it? Does it get payments on transactions?
Okay, so what would happen then? So if there are fewer countries using dollars, that means fewer countries would need dollars in the central bank foreign exchange reserves. So then what happens to these dollars? Well, they get sent back to the United States. Why is that a terrible thing? Why is that disastrous? Well, considering that the globe holds about, $5 trillion or $6 trillion in U.S. debt, this would lead to hyperinflation for the United States today. I mean, if let's say China dumps its $1.3 trillion it holds, puts it back into capital markets, how the heck is the United States going to cover that? Only way to cover that is by printing $1.3 trillion, or hoping that there would be another third-party source who would want to scoop up these dollars.
So what's the difference between having to print $1.3 trillion to deal with the de-dollarization that's happening, and printing $1.3 trillion because Joe Biden wants it?
Well, there's a big difference. For one thing, a lot of this money was already purchased by China. Let's use China as the example. Sure. China purchased $1.3 trillion over a year span. So let's say they buy a 20-year note or a 10-year note. Let's say they buy $500 billion worth. The United States only has to cover that within 10 years. They only have to start, repaying that bond to Beijing during that time span. So that's the big difference between printing $1.3 trillion now and printing $1.3 trillion over a 30-year span.
So it's essentially it's a big dump of dollars, a necessary dump of dollars into the U.S. economy, which would create hyperinflation.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. So a lot of people think that the United States, owns the world, but this is the thing now. In this type of global markets, I think it's the other way around. I think it's other countries that control the United States today because of how many countries control huge amounts of money of the U.S. dollar or U.S. debt. So I think that's a critical distinction between the two. So if China wanted to, let's say, control Taiwan or something, invade Taiwan, and the United States, no, you can't do that. We're going to put all these sanctions on you. They could say, yeah, you know what? Fine. You do that. We'll dump, let's say, $300 billion in the global capital markets. And I think the United States would back off, or at least corporate America would encourage U.S. government to not be so stringent on Beijing.
Right. So what are the odds of hyperinflation coming from this global push for de-dollarization? I mean, that's a slim possibility, isn't it? Hyperinflation.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I mean, there are a lot of Austrians said, there was going to be hyperinflation with the current, $6 or $8 trillion that were pumped into the U.S. economy with all this liquidity. I wouldn't go that far. Perhaps I'm just being optimistic, but so hyperinflation, I don't think that would happen because again, China is not going to suddenly say we're putting $1 trillion into the U.S. economy. I think it'd be more of a push, let's say Russia did. Now, Russia, after its annexation of Crimea, they engaged in a gradual de-dollarization push. Now, they haven't reached their full goal yet, but they've gradually done it through settling seaport transactions in rubles, setting up a SWIFT alternative, engaging in more currency swap agreements with regional countries, and buying more gold and reducing its holdings in foreign exchange reserves. I think that's more of a possibility than, let's say, China dumping everything at the same time, because they would also be hurt too, because then that's a $1.3 trillion investment that they would lose out on almost immediately. And then, of course, you'd have a threat. Now, I'm not guaranteeing it, but you'd have a threat of corporate America saying, okay, we have to take our capital out of China and put it back into the United States, which, considering the lack of backbone corporations have in the United States, I don't think that would happen.
Yeah, it seems unlikely. So although, as we've both just agreed here, the hyperinflation is unlikely, it is what's happening right now is putting pressure on existing inflation, which is already, what are the latest figures on inflation, Andrew?
Yeah, the latest one from BLS was a 40-year high of 7.9%. However, if you consider housing prices, which are trading or returning your all-time high, it'd probably be more, at least 10%.
Yeah, that's actually something I wanted to talk about briefly, Andrew. So we have this this 7.9%, but a few years back, wasn't the cost of housing and homes, wasn't that included in inflation, and then it got taken out?
Yeah, I think it's back as early as 1970s or 1980s. The CPI would have included house prices, and then I think it may have been the LBJ administration that altered how inflation was measured, just because it gives the government a better image of saying, oh, we're controlling the cost of living, and we can print all this money and we can spend all this money without creating any inflationary impact. So yeah, it was that, I think, 1970s, 1980s, maybe 1960s, but around there. And it's not just the United States doing this. I mean, countries do as well. Up here in Canada has removed used new and used automobiles from the CPI report. If that were included, like it is in the United States, you wouldn't have our 5.7%. You would have probably mirroring the United States of 7.9%. However, it could also even be higher because Canada has one of the largest or most valued housing markets in the world. So perhaps it would be more like 10%.
So what is the real term inflationary cost at the moment then? So we say in America it's 7.9, but if those figures of housing were included back in, and I understand that there are some good reasons for not including it other than just protecting the government's bottom line, but these are prices that impact actual people. People have mortgages to pay, they have rents to pay, especially in coastal East and West Coast states. These are a major chunk of change from the monthly pay packet. So they are impactful, but what kind of percentage is that?
Okay, but first of all, when you say that there's a good reason to hide that information,
I just assumed that there were, other than covering the government's behind.
Okay, so here's the thing. So if you remove those components from the monthly CPI data. Now, if you watch the Federal Reserve right now unfolding, now their thing is that they need to raise interest rates to combat inflation. Now, the consensus is that the Federal Reserve isn't doing enough to fight inflation. Now, I think it was James Bullard, the St. Louis Fed Bank president. He said that the Federal Reserve is behind the curve on combating inflation. With 25 basis points, Jerome Powell probably even conceded in his recent speech that, we need to go 50 basis points. Now, here's the thing. If you were to include, let's say, the house prices into the CPI data, you'd have, the inflation number a lot higher. Therefore, the United States would have to react, or the Federal Reserve would have to react even more by putting, let's say, a full percentage point hike during one FOMC meeting as opposed to 25 basis points. So I think when it comes to the interest rates factor, that's why you have to have as much information as possible heading into these FOMC meetings, that the Fed is just basing on what the government tells it. Okay,
and just very quickly, Andrew, before we finish up, any other economics news we should be looking out for?
Well, I think for the average person, inflation is the biggest thing happening right now. It's been said for a long time that inflation was happening, then it's transitory, and now inflation is going to be here for quite a while, and it's going to be red hot. So, your pocketbook is going to matter very much moving forward. Interest rates is another big thing. Your savings account is negative interest rate right now, the real negative interest rate, and then when it comes to interest rates on your debt, that's going to be a huge factor. I think, Wallet Hub, they came out with a recent report just before the FOMC meeting, and they penciled in a 25 basis point hike, and it said that would add probably about $3.2 billion in current interest charges on your, let's say, your credit cards, your student loans, home equity line of credit, all that stuff. So it's funny because you have higher interest rates to fight inflation, but higher interest rates are still going to have an inflationary impact for U.S. borrowers. So this shows that the Federal Reserve is trying to have a juggling act going on, trying to sustain growth, fight inflation, but they're going to hurt consumers in both, whether they act or don't act.
Getting hurt either way. Andrew Moran, Thank you ever so much.
Thank you for having me.
You're listening to Liberty Nation Radio, heard across the Radio America network from our flagship station in the nation's capital, WWRC in Washington, D.C. Remember, after this short break, we're back talking liberty and finding out what did those watching Judge Jackson's confirmation actually miss.
freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Mark Angelides.
It's almost over bar the shouting, and the final vote coming April for Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson and her ascension to the Supreme Court. But what was missing from the hearings? And how much more did we really need to know? Well, Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor and host of the most excellent Uprising podcast, Scott D. Cosenza, has been watching and listening to the whole circus and charade, and he's here to help shed just a little bit of light. Welcome back, Scott.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to be back.
So tell me, Scott, as is clearly obvious by every question I ask, I am a layman. And a Supreme Court justice, to me, it seems like a super big deal, a really major thing. I mean, the court is one of the three main pillars of America. And the appointment here, it's for life, whereas a president is usually just for a maximum of 8 years. So as a legal mind, how important is the nomination of a justice?
Well, you've got it right. It is vitally important, or it has the capacity to be vitally important. That's perhaps a better way to put it. And I would just take note that one of the big legal stories that's been ignored this week because of the hearings is Justice Thomas is in the hospital.
Yes.
That's the latest information we have about him from the court. They've announced that he is not COVID positive, but just sort of where that goes, to be spending, a number of days in the hospital for a person as old as he is not generally good. So we have to be sort of thinking about that, what could happen as well. But returning to your question,
73 years old, I believe,
yeah.
Which is still technically 10
73
years
young in the case of Justice Thomas, Mark. Let's say it that way.
10 years younger than Stephen Breyer.
For those of us who revere his jurisprudence. But no, what you said is exactly fair. I mean, you think about how much attention might be paid to one or two Senate seats. Well, what if they were electing a dozen Senate seats and they were for life? I mean, think about that's the sort of significance with the judgment, or that could be the judgment for Ketanji Brown Jackson. So it's a monster and has the capacity to be really change the way that Americans live fundamentally in certain instances of certain decisions.
Yeah, certainly for the Constitution, how it's applied. Now, I don't think I've seen quite as many partisan sound bites coming out of a SCOTUS nomination since the last one and then the one before that.
No, I think it was 2 ago. Coney Barrett was there. There was a little bit of a dip.
Coney Barrett was fairly. It was fairly in a dip, especially compared to Brett Kavanaugh.
Yeah.
But
I think we have to go as far back as Kavanaugh to
with all those many years ago. Now,
yes.
What I felt was missing, though, and again, I come at this from a layman's perspective, was information on what Judge Jackson's judicial philosophy is. Now, we hear about that all the time leading up to a confirmation hearing, and then it kind of went to crickets for me. So is that even important?
Mark, the job of any nominee, whether it's a nominee by a Republican or a nominee by the Democrat, is generally to say as little as possible while appearing before the committee. And so it's no shock that you wouldn't hear a lot from this nominee or any other about their judicial philosophy, because it's almost 100% negative. Like there's never going to be like, oh, I wasn't going to vote for you, but now I am. That the likelihood of that happening is very low, and the converse is higher. That she could say something that might actually turn a vote. And so it's best to not say anything. And pretty much she did say very little to nothing about that.
Well, that's actually kind of my point. So wouldn't Americans want to know the judicial philosophy of the nominees? And now here's something that I think you and I agree that Donald Trump did very well, was he put out a list of his potential Supreme Court picks.
I can't say enough about how impressed I was that he did that, given that, it is the job of the president to nominate people for the Supreme Court. And before Trump ever did that, it's almost as big a deal as the I don't know if you paid attention to U.S. politics enough to remember the contract with America.
I do,
back in the 1990s. And that was revolutionary because it said explicitly, we're going to do A, B, and C. These are promises that we will, you can hold us to, not just these nebulous, like, hey, for a greater prosperity.
We'll fix poverty. What does that
exactly.
mean? What does that mean? Give everybody a hamburger for a day.
And so I think that the Trump's list was remarkable, and I wrote about it for LibertyNation.com at the time. I think discussing how remarkable I thought it was, and a great thing for the country. I think it would be a great thing for every candidate for president to say, these are the people, from whom I would draw.
So getting into that then, so what people could do is they could look up the nominations information. They could look at past statements. They could look up what precisely the judicial philosophy was. But we're not getting that now. And do you think that's an important thing that people should know based on the importance of the Supreme Court justices?
It's hard to understand how we could get to a place where, so the answer to your question is yes, but that has become more important as time has gone on. And the reason why is because more and more issues have been kind of made into Supreme Court issues. At the time of the founding, there's a reason why the founders didn't get into this, and these contentious hearings are a recent, relatively speaking, with the history of America. These are recent events. Not even a generation ago, candidates for or nominees for this office were widely got 100% of the vote, or maybe one or three dissenters.
Yeah, it was over 90 for both
but
Alito and Ginsburg.
The more it seems like almost every issue in America ultimately becomes an issue for the Supreme Court. Who gets to live here? How they get to live? Do they have to wear a mask? Do they have to do X, Y, and Z? I mean, can they have an abortion? Every issue. And the more it gets to that, then I think we're just going to actually see less communication about judicial philosophy, because it becomes a bump in the road for the nomination, and we're going to see more kind of weaponization of the nomination process. It just makes sense that it would continue down that road, I think, rather than go back to the more collegial. Okay,
so I'm here at the question that I know you've been desperate to answer here, Scott. So the Senate, it's scheduled to vote on the confirmation before recess, I think is April 8th. And based on what you've seen so far, it seems almost certain, doesn't it, that at least one Republican will jump the aisle and vote for her?
I think that all Republicans, Mark, who have to worry about re-election, so that's all of them at some point, who have to capture a significant non-Republican base or non-Republican vote to get those votes. So basically sort of purpley state Republicans, they're going to have a tough time voting no to Judge Jackson. For the red staters, I'm sure they'll be able to march forth with a strong no vote. But yes, I do think that some Republicans, namely those purple state Republicans, will vote yes.
Well, it all comes down to politics, as with pretty much everything else. Scott D. Cosenza, thank you very much.
Cheers, Mark.
That's almost it for this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. I want to thank our guests, longtime host of this show, Tim Donner, national columnist Sarah Cowgill, economist and author Andrew Moran, and of course, Talking Liberties, Scott D. Cosenza. Naturally, my loudest and most prominent thanks go to you, the listeners, for taking the time to join us. You can read the musings of all of our guests on the page of libertynation.com. Now, my final thoughts for this week's show. No president, or mayor for that matter, knows precisely what they're getting into when they run for office. In the case of Mayr Adams, the fact that he's turning back towards the policies of Mayor Rudy Giuliani suggests that leading is perhaps a formula, and that those who deviate from the formula tend to go wrong. But with President Biden, he's been in office for decades. If there is a code to good governance, he seems to be ignoring it. Ralph Waldo Emerson once said, "Our chief want is someone who will inspire us to be what we know we could be." I think he meant that good leadership encourages us to be the best possible version of ourselves. In a sense, they give us a tacit permission to excel. It's no coincidence that when our leadership is confident and positive about the future, then the economy, the markets, the Constitution itself, all these are strengthened. But when we have the opposite, well, that way lies disaster. President Biden has, for good or ill, dedicated his life to public service. And yet when he achieves the pinnacle spot, he warns us of a dark winter. He tells us there are no good answers to the issues he himself brought about. Well, maybe it's time to create a new paradigm, one that disregards Ralph Waldo Emerson's wise words. and that is that we be the change agents in society. We make the bold decisions. No one's life was ever poorer for showing the face of bravery, the shadows of despair.